We're having this conversation on Monday. It'll come out on Friday, but they just announced this 6-week extension. What's it like for you as a coach? Like, is it hard to sit and wait? What's that experience like as the CBA plays out?
It is hard. It's hard to sit and wait, not knowing the timing of when things are going to shake out, when free agency is going to start, when we're going to be able to know what the calendar looks like. It's also hard because we have a lot of players that are in and out.
The entire basketball world froze the moment Stephanie White sat down for her latest interview, because this time she didn't come to entertain, reassure, or dodge controversy. She came with clarity, with conviction, with a fire in her voice that made even the interviewer lean back in their chair. And when the topic shifted to the new CBA and Caitlin Clark's place inside the league's shifting power structure, Stephanie didn't blink, didn't soften, didn't wrap her words in PR-approved politeness. She spoke with the rawness of someone who had lived through the political battles inside women's basketball for 2 decades and was finally done pretending everything was fine. If the WNBA wants to evolve, she said, eyes locked on camera, then it has to confront reality, including how players like Caitlin impact negotiations, expectations, and the future of this league. And suddenly, the conversation wasn't casual anymore. It was seismic. Fans erupted instantly, not just because Stephanie acknowledged Caitlin's influence on the CBA, but because she did it without jealousy, without bitterness, without fear of backlash from the old guard. She spoke openly about how rookies aren't supposed to shift economic landscapes this quickly. But Caitlin did anyway. She talked about how the league never expected someone with this much visibility, this much leverage, this much pressure. And beneath her words was an unmistakable current. Admiration wrapped in warning, respect wrapped in challenge, truth wrapped in something dangerously close to prophecy. Because Stephanie White didn't just reveal her thoughts, she revealed a storm the league has been trying to contain long before Stephanie. White delivered the most brutally honest interview of her coaching career, long before Caitlin Clark became the center of every CBA conversation. A quiet tension had been brewing underneath the surface of women's basketball, one that connected economics, influence, generational change, and the unspoken power struggle over who controlled the future of the WNBA. To understand why Stephanie spoke so boldly, you have to rewind to the early months of Caitlin's arrival, when her presence began shifting the gravitational pull of the entire league. Ratings spiked. Ticket sales exploded. Road games turned into sellouts. Marketing budgets tripled overnight. And suddenly, the WNBA, long undervalued, long overlooked, long fighting for every inch of respect, found itself facing something it hadn't prepared for. A rookie with the market power of a global superstar. Stephanie noticed this shift before most coaches did. She watched as Caitlin's name dominated sports coverage, not just nationally, but internationally. She saw arenas fill with families who had never watched a WNBA game. She saw networks fight over broadcasting rights they had once ignored. She saw merchandise fly off shelves.
It's also hard because we have a lot of players that are in and out of market. And so from a scheduling and workout standpoint, we schedule a week ahead and schedule a week in advance. And if it's gonna shut down, then we need to shut everything down. Hopefully we can continue to work with our players that are injured, because we have a lot of them in market as well. But it's very difficult being in limbo. It's very difficult when you're talking to your staff and you don't really know.
Fly off shelves at rates the league had never imagined. But she also saw the pressure Caitlin carried behind the scenes, the exhaustion masked beneath her competitive fire, the weight of expectations no rookie should endure, the way every word out of her mouth became a headline analyzed to death by fans and detractors alike. Stephanie had lived her entire career fighting for visibility, so she recognized instantly the emotional cost of sudden fame. The deeper Stephanie observed, the clearer the internal fractures became. On one side of the league were the veterans women who had spent a decade grinding, fighting for small raises, traveling in conditions that paled in comparison to the NBA, and navigating contracts that made off-season overseas play a necessity rather than a choice. These veterans didn't resent Caitlin personally, they resented the timing. The fact that everything they had pushed for finally became possible only when a superstar rookie arrived, who had the attention of the world. Stephanie empathized with them. She knew their pain intimately. She had lived through earlier CBAs that felt like battles for survival rather than progress. On the other side were the younger players, rookies and rising stars who looked at Caitlin and saw the beginning of a shift. Proof that their generation could argue for better pay, better benefits, better conditions without being told to wait their turn. They rallied behind Caitlin's presence, not because she asked them to, but because her success created leverage they'd never had before. Suddenly, the league wasn't negotiating with a collective abstract identity. It was negotiating with the reality of the Caitlin Clark effecta phenomenon, powerful enough to reshape financial models. And then there were the owners and executives, the people who controlled the CBA negotiations from the shadows. They loved the numbers Caitlin brought in, but feared the precedent she set. A rookie shouldn't command this much economic influence. A rookie shouldn't trigger discussions of salary restructuring. A rookie shouldn't disrupt the carefully budgeted ecosystem of the WNBA. But Caitlin did.
It's part of the growing process of our league. We certainly understand that. As our staff is mostly former players, we understand that as well. But being in limbo is difficult.
Yeah, well, like you said, the other thing the CBA will decide is stuff like...
Caitlin did. And no legal language, no strategic planning, no PR messaging could stop it. Stephanie walked into league meetings where executives spoke of Caitlin's impact in cold economic terms. She accelerates demand curves. She shifts negotiation leverage. She forces us to rethink mid-tier salary models. But Stephanie heard something underneath those boardroom phrases. Fear. Not fear of Caitlin failing, fear of Caitlin succeeding too much. Fear that her influence would force a level of transparency and financial accountability the league wasn't ready to offer. Fear that the new CBA wouldn't be crafted on their terms, but on the terms shaped by Caitlin's gravity, Caitlin's reach, Caitlin's unprecedented stardom. Meanwhile, Caitlin faced her own internal battle. She entered the league wanting to play basketball, not negotiate its economics, not carry its branding weight, not become the symbol of an entire movement. But every time she stepped on the court, the league's financial foundation shook a little more. Every time she spoke, fans extrapolated her words into demands she never made. Every time she played well, executives panicked about the bargaining power she was unintentionally accumulating. Caitlin didn't want to be a CBA disruptor, but she'd become one simply by existing. The emotional toll on her was deeper than most people guessed. Teammates whispered about money. Journalists pressed her about league conditions. Fans begged her to save the WNBA. Critics accused her of entitlement when she hadn't even spoken about the CBA publicly. She was trapped between expectations she never asked for and responsibilities she couldn't avoid. And in those moments of private vulnerability moments, when she questioned whether she was failing, whether she was burdening the league, whether she was accidentally creating divisions, saw the truth. Caitlin wasn't fighting against the league. She was fighting to survive the weight of becoming its turning point. Stephanie's respect for Caitlin wasn't blind adoration. It was rooted in empathy, shared experience, and the awareness that Caitlin was being thrown into political fire she never trained for. But Stephanie also saw something else in her, something powerful, something rare.
The other thing the CBA will decide is stuff like the core. Will they have core designations? So I'm sure that goes into all your planning. So can you plan? Like, can you even start to game plan for what you want to get on your roster?
I think we can game plan for what we'd like to have. I think the way that things shake out in terms of what things look like financially, we have a young core, so that will certainly impact, our ability to make certain moves in free agency. I'm glad I'm not the GM, I can tell you.
Rare. Caitlin had the potential to reshape not only how the league functioned, but how players were valued. And that terrified the people in power, which is why Stephanie's interview wasn't just commentary. It was a warning signal, a coded message to Caitlin that negotiations were shifting behind the scenes, that people were positioning themselves, that the CBA wasn't just a document, it was a battlefield forming around her. And while fans celebrated Stephanie's bold honesty, they didn't know what she couldn't say publicly. They didn't know a shocking development had been brewing inside the CBA committee, one that involved Caitlin directly. A development so explosive, so politically loaded that Stephanie had been debating for weeks whether to reveal it, and now that secret was about to erupt. The truth Stephanie White couldn't say out loud during the interview was the same truth now tightening like a vice around the league. Caitlin Clark wasn't just influencing the new CBA. She had become the centerpiece of a secret internal proposal that could permanently reshape the power dynamics of the WNBA. And Caitlin had no idea. Not because she wasn't paying attention, not because she avoided politics, but because the committee deliberately kept her out of the room while they discussed her future, as if she were a bargaining chip instead of a human being. Behind closed doors, executives didn't talk about her stats or her growth or her rookie challenges. They talked about what her existence meant for money, leverage, and long-term economic control. Stephanie heard these conversations with growing dread. Because she knew the committee wasn't preparing to elevate Caitlin, they were preparing to weaponize her as the CBA. Negotiations intensified. Tensions reached a breaking point. The league's financial analysts presented projections showing that Caitlin's arrival had inflated revenue estimates so dramatically that the old financial model was now outdated. But instead of celebrating that explosion, the committee panicked. They feared players would demand more pay than the league could provide. They feared Caitlin's market power would force owners to spend more. They feared the WNBA's leverage would shift toward players for the first time. And so, behind the veil of progress, they drafted a clause that would fundamentally change how star contracts were structured. They called it Tier 1 Impact Allocation. Stephanie called it what it really was, a subtle economic cage. The clause stated that the league could designate one player per team whose contract negotiations would be handled through a league-guided, collaborative structure, rather than through traditional free market player-agent negotiations. The phrase sounded harmless, innovative, but Stephanie read between the lines. League-guided meant controlled. Collaborative structure meant limited. And one player per team meant only the biggest stars would be affected. The clause was unofficially nicknamed the Clark Rule. It was engineered quietly and strategically. To prevent the financial chaos executives feared Caitlin might unintentionally unleash by simply being too popular, too powerful, too economically valuable. When Stephanie first saw the clause, her stomach dropped. "You can't do this," she said during the meeting. "You're creating a financial ceiling for the very player who broke every ceiling before her." The room fell silent, not out of guilt, but out of annoyance. One executive responded coldly, "Clark is an asset, not an anomaly. Assets must be managed." Another added, "If she becomes too strong, we lose negotiation control. This clause protects the league long term." Stephanie slammed her folder shut and stood. Players aren't products. And if the league treats them like assets instead of people, you won't have stars, you'll have a mutiny. But the committee dismissed her concerns, brushing her off with patronizing assurances and political smiles. Meanwhile, Caitlin sensed something was wrong long before she knew the details. Players around her became tense whenever the CBA was mentioned. Her own staff seemed guarded, choosing their words too carefully. Her agent kept asking to schedule meetings that never happened. Even teammates avoided the topic, not out of secrecy, but out of fear of being caught in the middle of a political firestorm. One morning after practice, Caitlin overheard two veterans whispering, "They're making rules around her. She doesn't even know." The word struck her like a blow to the chest. What rules? Why? And who was hiding them from her? Caitlin went straight to her agent, demanding answers. His hesitation told her everything before he said a word. He looked at her with the helpless expression of someone who had been trying to protect her from a truth too heavy to place on her shoulders. "There's talk," he began carefully, "not official, not public. but you're being used as a model for certain negotiation structures. They think your popularity sets unrealistic expectations for the rest of the league. Caitlin's heart dropped. Unrealistic. I didn't ask for any of this. I just play. He nodded. I know. But they're worried about what comes next. They're planning around you as if you're a variable they must restrain, not a player they should support. Caitlin didn't realize how deep the manipulation went until she received a message from a committee staffer. She barely knew, anonymous, nervous. Typed in a rush. They're discussing limiting superstar earnings. They're calling it an economic stabilization measure. You're the reason they're pushing it forward. Caitlin read the message 5 times, pulse racing, blood roaring in her ears. They weren't just negotiating with her name, they were restructuring her financial future without her consent, without her involvement, without her knowledge. She felt blindsided, used, exploited by a system she'd been told was finally ready to embrace its stars. Instead, it was preparing to cage them. Then came the shocking twist that flipped everything upside down. During a CBA session, someone leaked a confidential recording. Nobody knew who did it. Nobody knew how it escaped the room. But the audio swept across social media like wildfire. In the clip, a committee member stated, "With chilling indifference, we can't allow Clark-Lavelle influence to set a new standard. If she demands a salary proportional to her impact, we'll have no leverage left." Another voice added, "We must contain the Clark effect before it becomes unmanageable." The tone wasn't strategic. It was hostile. It wasn't business. It was fear disguised as authority. By the time Caitlin heard the clip, the world had already reacted. Fans were furious. Players were shocked. Former legends chimed in, outraged that the league was apparently trying to suppress the earning potential of the very star who revived national interest in women's basketball. And Caitlin, she sat alone in her apartment, shaking, horrified that her efforts, her passion, her sacrifices had turned into a threat executives wanted to neutralize. But the twist wasn't the leak. The twist was what came after another. Another recording surfaced, this one shorter, quieter, but infinitely more devastating. A single sentence spoken in a somber, private tone. "If Caitlin Clark pushes too hard, we'll steer negotiations toward players we can control like White." Caitlin's breath stopped. White. Stephanie White. The mentor who defended her. The woman who stood up for players. The coach who challenged her with respect. Why was Stephanie's name included in the plan? Was she part of the strategy? Was she being used? Or was she being targeted too? Caitlin replayed the clip. Hoping she misheard, she hadn't. The league wasn't just planning around Caitlin. They were preparing to replace her as the face of the negotiation movement if she became too influential, and worst of all, Stephanie had known and hadn't told her. Caitlin felt the first crack of heartbreak with Stephanie protecting her, or protecting herself. The truth was coming, and it would break both of them, before it set anything free. The leaked recordings hit the league like a meteor. But the emotional impact on Caitlin Clark was far more catastrophic than anything the public could imagine. When she first heard her name twisted into a threat, a liability, a financial danger that must be contained, she felt the ground rip open beneath her feet. But when she replayed the second recording, the one where an executive quietly suggested shifting negotiation power toward players we can control, like White, her entire world tilted off its axis. Stephanie White, the one person who had spoken to her with honesty, the one person who understood pressure without using it against her, the one person who seemed to see Caitlin as more than an economic disruption. Why was Stephanie included in a conversation about control? Why was she described as the safe alternative? Why hadn't Stephanie warned her? The doubt crept in slowly, then violently. And doubt, when mixed with betrayal, comes something far more dangerous. Caitlin sat alone in her dark apartment for hours, replaying the clip until the words became knives scraping across her nerves. She wasn't just hurt, she felt used, manipulated, played by a league. It didn't respect her, and possibly by a mentor she thought she could trust. She began questioning every conversation she'd had with Stephanie. Every encouraging phrase, every warning disguised as guidance. Was Stephanie trying to help her grow, or was she softening her into compliance? Was she lifting Caitlin up, or preparing to step into her place when league politics demanded someone more manageable? Her emotions spiraled, turning confusion into anger, anger into fear, and fear into a kind of resolve she had never felt before. She needed truth real, truth not, the polished honesty of interviews or the careful disclaimers of executives. She needed Stephanie to look her in the eyes and either confess or fight back. Meanwhile, the WNBA was unraveling behind the scenes. Executives scrambled to issue statements discrediting the recordings, but their voices shook with the panic of people who realized far too late that the public had already chosen a side and they weren't choosing the league. Social media exploded into chaos. Hashtags demanding transparency trended worldwide. Fans who had once criticized Caitlin now defended her with ferocity, calling out the league for exploiting her impact while punishing her for it. Former players condemned the manipulation tactics, calling it financial suppression disguised as policy. And inside locker rooms across the country, players whispered about the truth they had always suspected but never fully seen. The league didn't want stars, it wanted control. Stephanie White, meanwhile, found herself in a storm of her own. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing, executives demanding silence. Journalists begging for comments, players asking whether the recordings were real, whether she was involved, whether Caitlin was being targeted. But what shook Stephanie most wasn't the scrutiny. It was Caitlin's silence. For the first time since their bond formed, Caitlin wasn't responding. No messages, no calls, no updates, nothing. Stephanie felt panic rising in her chest. She needed Caitlin to know the truth. She needed Caitlin to understand she wasn't part of the alliance, that she wasn't a pawn, that she wasn't the controlled figure executives believed her to be. But every minute, Caitlin stayed silent. Stephanie feared their relationship was cracking under political pressure neither of them had asked for. The next escalation came when an emergency CBA committee meeting was scheduled, one that Caitlin was expected to attend. Even though rookies typically weren't asked to, rumors spread instantly. They're going to address the recordings. They're going to reprimand her. They're going to force her to deny everything. But the truth was even darker. Inside the meeting, before Caitlin arrived, committee discussed a new proposal, one designed to regain control of the exploding narrative. And the proposal was chilling. A temporary freeze on all individual sponsorship negotiations during CBA talks, effectively blocking Caitlin from leveraging her influence until the league regained footing. Stephanie nearly exploded. "You're punishing her for your leak," she snapped. "You're punishing her for your corruption." But the committee responded coldly. "We're stabilizing the environment." Stephanie realized the truth. They weren't stabilizing anything. They were tightening a noose. Caitlin walked into the meeting unaware of the new proposal. But she felt the hostility instantly. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, calculating, nervous, irritated. Executives greeted her with forced smiles. Players whispered. Cameras rolled. The tension was suffocating. But Caitlin ignored all of it and sat down across from Stephanie. Their eyes met Stephanie's filled with urgency, Caitlin's with distrust. The room fell silent. A league official began speaking, but Caitlin didn't hear the words. She only heard the recording echoing in her head. "We'll steer negotiations toward players we can control like White." She felt the urge to confront Stephanie right then, to demand answers in front of everyone, to tear down the curtain and expose the politics choking the league. But Caitlin held her tongue because another feeling colder, sharper began forming inside her. Then the meeting reached its breaking point. A high-ranking executive played the recording aloud. Gasps filled the room. Chairs shifted. Players stared in shock. Executives paled. The audio ended, and a horrifying silence followed until a veteran player stood up and said exactly what everyone was thinking. "So the league's plan is to control us through the biggest star we've ever had." The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Accusations flew. Executives tried to deflect, but players weren't buying it. The meeting was devolving into chaos, and Stephanie rose from her seat and slammed her hand on the table. ENOUGH. The room froze. This isn't about negotiations. This isn't about contracts. This is about power. And if you want to accuse me, if you want to use my name in your recordings, then say it to my face. Caitlin's heart slammed painfully. Stephanie continued, voice shaking. I have never worked against my players. I have never sabotaged Caitlin Clark. And I have never allowed this league to manipulate me. A committee member countered coldly. Then why are you the face of the alternative strategy? Stephanie glared at him. Because you put me there. Because you needed someone to weaponize. Because you chose my name knowing I'd be the hardest person to disprove without igniting a civil war. And that's when the second major twist detonated. A younger staff member shaking, pale, emotional, stood slowly and revealed the truth. Stephanie wasn't the controlled alternative. She wasn't the backup plan. She was the target. The recordings weren't about steering negotiations toward her. They were about framing her as the replacement so Caitlin would turn against her. The room went silent. What? Caitlin whispered, disbelief choking her voice. The staffer continued, tears forming. They needed the two of you divided. You're the only pair strong enough to unite players across generations. If you unite, you control the CBA. If you fracture, the league controls it. Caitlin's chest tightened as the horrifying truth sank in. They weren't trying to replace her with Stephanie, they were trying to destroy both of them. Before they became unstoppable together, Stephanie stared at Caitlin, hurt, trembling, pleading, and Caitlin's breath hitched. Because she finally saw the truth in Stephanie's eyes. But before either woman could speak, security burst into the room. Clark, White, you're both coming with us. Number. Explanation. No warning. The Alliance had just made its next move. The moment security stormed into the conference room and ordered Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White to leave with them. The entire CBA committee erupted into chaos. Players shouted, executives flailed for control, and reporters waiting outside sensed something explosive unfolding behind the closed doors. But for Caitlin and Stephanie, everything became eerily silent as they were escorted down the dim hallway. Silent except for the pounding of their own hearts and the suffocating realization that the league wasn't de-escalating conflict. It was escalating it to an unprecedented level. The guards didn't touch them, didn't explain anything, didn't make eye contact. They simply marched them into a restricted wing of the building normally reserved for private operations meetings. Caitlin felt her stomach twisting. Stephanie felt her pulse rising. They weren't being protected. They were being contained. News of their removal reached the outside world in minutes. A reporter caught a blurry photo of Caitlin being led through the hallway. Her expression tense, Stephanie walking beside her with a look somewhere between fury and disbelief. That single image detonated across social media, spreading faster than any official statement could. Fans immediately launched into panic. Why is security escorting Caitlin? What did Stephanie do? Is the league silencing them? Theories multiplied by the thousands. Former players demanded answers. Journalists refreshed feeds waiting for updates. Meanwhile, the WNBA's PR department scrambled to draft a statement. But every version read like an admission of guilt, and they knew it. Inside the restricted area, Caitlin and Stephanie were placed in a small conference room, no windows. A single table, cold fluorescent lights humming overhead. The door shut behind them with a heavy thud. Stephanie exhaled sharply, pacing back and forth. This is exactly what they do when they're cornered, she muttered. They contain the chaos instead of fixing the cause. Caitlin sat at the table, fingers trembling as she processed the emotional weight of everything. She felt exposed, violated, manipulated, and now treated like a problem rather than a person. They're making it look like we're the ones who caused this, she whispered. Stephanie stopped pacing. Because they're terrified. The truth is out and they're losing control. The emotional fallout for Caitlin was overwhelming. She had entered the league with the dream of elevating women's basketball, not becoming the center of a political war. She had wanted to lead by example, not be punished for her impact. But now she saw how fragile her position truly was. In the span of an hour, she'd gone from rising star to perceived threat. Her stomach churned as she imagined fans wondering if she'd done something wrong, sponsors evaluating their next move, teammates questioning her stability. She felt tears burn behind her eyes, not from weakness, but from the crushing realization that the league she loved was willing to sacrifice her reputation to save its own structure. Stephanie watched. Caitlin's expression shift from confusion to devastation to quiet rage. She knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "This isn't your fault. You didn't cause this. You're exposing what they've been hiding for years." Caitlin wiped her eyes. "I never asked for this fight." Stephanie nodded. "You didn't, but they forced it onto you because you're powerful." Meanwhile, outside the building, the public fallout was escalating into something the league could no longer control. Former stars like Sue Bird and Cheryl Swoops posted messages calling for transparency. NBA players chimed in, questioning why the WNBA was escorting two of its most respected figures away like criminals. Fans began gathering outside the building with signs. "Let Caitlin speak. Stop the silencing. We stand with Stephanie." Even casual sports fans who didn't fully understand the CBA were united in outrage. The optics were catastrophic. And then the bombshell dropped. A new leaked clip appeared online audio, captured during the final moments of the CBA meeting after Caitlin and Stephanie were removed. In it, an executive could be heard saying, "If we don't isolate White and Clark now, they will rally the players. And if they rally the players, we lose control of the negotiations." The room exploded. Fans retweeted the clip millions of times in minutes. Journalists declared it the worst leadership scandal in league history. Players began openly calling for accountability, igniting a movement the league had desperately tried to prevent. Back inside the restricted room, Caitlin's phone buzzed, relentlessly notifications flooding in despite the terrible cell reception. She glanced at the screen and saw hundreds of messages, support flooding from people she didn't even know. She looked up at Stephanie, her voice shaking. "They're turning on the league. Everyone's demanding answers." Stephanie nodded grimly. "Because they see what we're seeing now, the truth." But it wasn't just emotional fallout anymore. It wasn't even just public outrage. It was something far more dangerous. Wedge had been driven between players and executives, between fans and leadership, between truth and manipulation, and the divide was widening by the minute. Stephanie leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Caitlin, once we leave this room, nothing will be the same. You understand that, right?" Caitlin swallowed hard. "I know." Stephanie's eyes softened. "They're scared of you. That means you're stronger than you think. Means you're stronger than you think." The door suddenly unlocked. Two executives entered, faces pale, voices tense. "Ladies, we need to talk." The next round of fallout was coming, and this time, it wouldn't just be emotional or public. It would be personal, targeted, and irreversible. The two executives who entered the restricted room tried to mask their panic behind stiff posture and forced professionalism. But Caitlin and Stephanie could see straight through it. Their eyes were wide, their hands tense. Their voices brittle, a sign that the situation outside had spiraled far beyond anything they prepared for. One of them closed the door slowly, as if buying time. The other took a seat across from Caitlin, folding his hands with the stiffness of someone rehearsing a lie. "We need to clarify some things," he began. Stephanie didn't sit. She crossed her arms and stared him down. "No, you need to explain why we were escorted out of a negotiation like criminals." He swallowed. "There has been misinformation. Caitlin repeated, her voice steady but trembling beneath the surface. "Your own voices were on the recordings." The room fell into a suffocating silence. The second executive tried to regain control, There are factors you don't understand. Context that Stephanie slammed her hands on the table, eyes blazing. Don't you dare hide behind context. You tried to isolate her. You tried to turn the players against her. You tried to use me as a wedge. And now the world knows it. Her voice echoed off the walls, sharp enough to make both executives flinch. The first executive leaned forward. We can still resolve this if all parties remain discreet. Caitlin froze. Stephanie went still, discreet. The word hung in the room like poison. What exactly are you asking us to do? Stephanie asked slowly. He exhaled, lowering his voice. We need both of you to release a joint statement clarifying that the recordings were manipulated and that you have full confidence in the negotiation process. It will stabilize the public reaction. Caitlin felt her breath catch not from shock, but from the stunning audacity of the request. They weren't apologizing. They weren't correcting. They weren't owning anything. They wanted silence, compliance, erasure. No, Caitlin said quietly. The executives looked up sharply. Stephanie nodded in support. We're not doing that, she added. But the executives were prepared. If you refuse, one said, choosing his words with precision, the league will have grounds to pursue disciplinary measures for conduct detrimental to the negotiation environment. Caitlin felt her heart sink. Stephanie's jaw locked. You're threatening her career, Stephanie whispered. The executive didn't deny it. We are protecting the stability of the league. Caitlin's voice cracked not with weakness, but with disbelief. By destroying mine. For the first time, one of the executives softened. Caitlin, you are the most important player we've had in decades. But that importance must be managed. Stephanie stepped in front of Caitlin as if shielding her. She doesn't need managing. She needs respect. But the executive shook his head. Respect comes when systems function. Right now, the system is collapsing. Then came the shift. The second executive slid a sealed envelope across the table-thick, heavy official. Stephanie narrowed her eyes. What is that? He responded with forced calm, but his trembling hand betrayed him. A pre-written amendment to the new CBA, one that would place Caitlin under a special performance and leadership review process for the next 2 seasons overseen by the league. Caitlin's chest tightened painfully. You're putting me on probation. No, he replied softly. We're giving you structure. Stephanie grabbed the envelope, ripped it open, and her face went white. Pages upon pages outlined restrictions, mandatory evaluations, media limitations, and clauses that stripped Caitlin of negotiation rights. It wasn't structure. It was shackles. Stephanie threw the papers onto the floor. Absolutely not. She is not signing that. Caitlin felt dizzy, betrayed, cornered. Why would you do this? She whispered. The executive answered with a sentence that made Caitlin's blood run cold. Because you are becoming bigger than the league's ability to contain. Before Caitlin could respond, before Stephanie could explode, before the executives could reinforce their ultimatum, a deafening alarm rang through the building. Red emergency lights flashed. The door burst open. A breathless league staffer ran in. Stop everything, she gasped, voice shaking. There's been a new leak. The executives stiffened. Stephanie and Caitlin exchanged a glance. What leak? Stephanie demanded. The staffer held out a phone, hands trembling. Someone released the full conversation. The part from before the recording. The part you didn't hear. Caitlin snatched the phone. The video played instantly. A boardroom. Executives in heated argument. Then a voice Caitlin recognized but never imagined hearing in this context. We can't let Clark and White get ahead of us. Not after what they found. Caitlin froze. Stephanie's breath hitched. The executives paled. What we found? Caitlin whispered. What did we find? The clip continued, revealing the words that shattered the room. If the players learn about the financial diversion report, the entire CBA collapses. Stephanie's knees buckled. Caitlin felt the ground vanish beneath her. Financial diversion, a phrase neither of them had ever heard. a phrase that sent waves of terror through everyone in the room. "What did you do?" Stephanie demanded, voice breaking, before the executives could answer. The staffer spoke barely above a whisper. "They didn't just hide money from the players." She swallowed hard. "They hid it from you." Caitlin felt her throat close. "You mean?" The staffer nodded, double quotes, "Yes. They've been using your revenue numbers to negotiate deals you never knew existed." Caitlin staggered backward. Stephanie whispered, horrified, "They built the CBA around her and lied to both of us." The alarm kept blaring. Security scrambled outside. Executives panicked. Players flooded social media, and Caitlin Clark, shaking, betrayed, furious, looked at Stephanie with eyes that no longer held doubt, only resolve. "We exposed them," she whispered. Stephanie nodded, together. Before they could move, the lights cut out. The door slammed shut. A lock clicked from the outside, and a cold voice echoed through the dark. "You're too late." The room went pitch black, but Caitlin didn't freeze this time. The fear that once hollowed her out had transformed into clarity, into fury, into purpose. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't begging for explanations or waiting for the league to give her permission to breathe. She stood in the darkness with Stephanie at her side, knowing with bone-deep certainty that the people locking them in that room weren't protecting the WNBA. They were protecting themselves. And for the first time since her rookie season began, Caitlin felt something stronger than pressure, stronger than fear. Stronger than betrayal, she felt the undeniable responsibility of someone who could tear down an entire system and rebuild it from the ashes. Because the truth was out now. The financial diversion, the manipulation, the isolation tactics, the lies, the fabricated strategies designed to control her, divide players, weaponize influence, and bury power where only executives could reach it. They tried to silence her. They tried to turn her against her mentor. They tried to cage the very force that revived their sport. But they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated what happens when players unify. And they underestimated the fire they ignited inside Caitlin Clark. The WNBA will not change because executives decide it must. It will change because people demand it, because fans refuse to accept corruption, because players stand together against manipulation disguised as leadership. And Caitlin can't fight that battle alone, not anymore. She needs voices outside those locked doors. She needs people who see through the league's polished statements. She needs fans who are louder than the systems trying to contain her. So here is the call. Pay attention. Speak out. Share the truth. Hold power accountable. Support the players who risk their careers to expose corruption. Make sure the league knows. The world is watching, because this story isn't ending in darkness. It's beginning in it. And the next move belongs to every single one of us. The next move belongs to every single one of us.